Mistress changed the baby's ultrasound. Millionaire thought pregnant wife lied. Until delivery day. The storm raged outside as Clarissa Caulfield clutched the ultrasound photo against her heart, tears streaming down her cheeks. Her husband, the millionaire businessman Richard Caulfield, glared at her with cold suspicion. Rumors, half-truths, and whispered secrets had twisted his faith in her. A single doubt, planted like a malignant seed by Richard's mistress, threatened to tear their marriage apart. The mistress had tampered with the ultrasound, leading Richard to believe this unborn child was not his. With the tension climbing to a breaking point, all Clarissa could do was cling to hope. Little did they know, the day of reckoning was coming on delivery day. Clarissa Turner was born in a small town outside of Boston, where the rolling hills and autumn leaves provided a peaceful backdrop to her childhood. She was the youngest of 3 daughters in a modest but loving family. Her parents, Harriet and James Turner, instilled in her a sense of integrity that she carried into her adult life. Clarissa had always believed in family, marriage, and the dream that love could conquer all obstacles. She went to college on the outskirts of the city, studying marketing. Although she excelled academically, Clarissa's passion lay in forming genuine connections with people. As she grew older, her kind heart and empathetic nature made her an asset to any environment she inhabited. Friends admired her sincerity, and her professors lauded her emotional intelligence, a quality that would later become a cornerstone of her life story. It was in her final year of college that she first met Richard Caulfield. Tall, confident, and polished, Richard was already the talk of academic circles for his entrepreneurial flair. He came from the illustrious Caulfield family, known for their investments in luxury real estate and high-end retail chains. Despite his affluent background, Richard was surprisingly down-to-earth, in person at least at first glance. He possessed an undeniable magnetism that drew Clarissa in from the start. They met by chance in the university library. Clarissa had been searching for a particular business journal, while Richard was finishing up a project for one of his startup ventures. In the hush of the library, they exchanged shy smiles, and a conversation bloomed. What began as a polite exchange about supply chain processes soon evolved into an exploration of each other's interests, hobbies, and dreams. Within weeks, Clarissa found herself smitten by Richard's sharp intellect, quick wit, and seemingly warm soul. He, in turn, admired Clarissa for her humility and gentle strength. The two formed a bond that felt both exhilarating and secure, like discovering a hidden path that both intrigued and comforted them. It wasn't long before the pair began dating, forging a relationship that seemed built to last. Little did they know that beneath the surface, destiny had other plans in store, ones that would test their love beyond any limit they could have imagined. A year after their first meeting, Richard proposed to Clarissa in an intimate setting at his family's lake house. The candlelight flickered on the gentle waves as he knelt on one knee with a small box in his hand. Clarissa, surprised and overjoyed, said yes immediately. Their engagement was a moment of unfiltered happiness. Harriet and James Turner blessed them wholeheartedly, while Richard's parents, Arthur and Eloise Caulfield, expressed cautious approval. After all, Clarissa wasn't from a prominent social background, and the Caulfields had grand designs for their son's future. However, Richard's parents soon warmed to Clarissa when they saw the sincerity in her eyes. Arthur, a stern businessman, found Clarissa refreshing, and Eloise couldn't help but see the genuine love radiating between her son and this unassuming young woman. The lavish wedding took place 6 months later, bringing together the Turners' closest friends and the Caulfields' sprawling network of high society contacts in a gala that lit up every social column. Their honeymoon, a whirlwind tour through parts of Europe, Paris, Rome, and Athens, sealed the deal on their devotion to one another. They strolled hand in hand along the Seine, indulged in gelato near the Colosseum, and watched sunsets over the Aegean Sea. Each step deepened the bond, strengthening a marriage that seemed destined for happiness. Once back in Boston, they moved into a high-rise penthouse overlooking the harbor. It was Richard's domain, a modern space with sleek furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows, and the best that money could buy. Clarissa tried to insert small touches of warmth, throw pillows, a well-stocked bookshelf, and fresh flowers in every room. She often joked that she wanted the penthouse to feel like a home, not a museum. Richard would laugh, kissing her on the forehead, promising that her presence alone had already transformed the cold walls into something filled with love. For 2 years, they lived in marital bliss. Clarissa joined a marketing firm, quickly rising through the ranks. Richard dove deeper into investments and expanded his real estate ventures across state lines. In public, they were the golden couple, radiant, successful, and seemingly unstoppable. But lurking behind the smiles and photo ops was the pressure that came with the Caulfield name, as well as the demands of high society. For Clarissa, the question wasn't if a storm would come, but when. In the hush of her heart, she hoped their love was strong enough to weather any tempest. Enter Vivian Brooks, a woman of striking beauty and undeniable ambition. She had once been a junior associate in one of Richard's branches of real estate. However, a series of savvy moves and opportune friendships propelled her into Richard's inner circle within a year. Vivian was the kind of person who could walk into any room and command attention. Her sleek black hair, impeccably tailored suits, and smoky eyes left a lasting impression on those she encountered. Richard first noticed Vivian during a corporate event in New York City. Though Clarissa accompanied him, she was busy chatting with old college friends. Vivian glided over to Richard's table, introduced herself with a perfect smile, and started discussing business opportunities. She praised him for his genius approach to cross-market expansion and teased that she would do anything to shadow his footsteps. Flattery, as it turned out, was one of Vivian's favorite weapons, and she wielded it with precision. Over the following months, Vivian found reason after reason to consult with Richard. She pretended to need guidance on commercial properties, international investments, or philanthropic endeavors. Richard, always eager to share his knowledge, initially saw her as a promising protégé, someone he could mentor. However, beneath the professional veneer, an undercurrent of flirtation ran between them. Vivian's compliments became more personal, her eyes lingering on him, her smiles more suggestive. Clarissa, caught up in her own demanding job, didn't immediately notice the shift. She was proud of Richard's success, encouraging him to help new talents in his company. When she saw him celebrating Vivian's small triumphs, Clarissa dismissed any unease as simple professional camaraderie. After all, Richard was charming and helpful to most of his employees. Yet, something about Vivian's unwavering gaze and too smooth compliments made Clarissa uneasy in ways she couldn't fully articulate. Life changed drastically when rumors reached Clarissa's ears. A close colleague of hers at the marketing firm, Tanya Lewis, mentioned seeing Richard having a cozy dinner with Vivian at a discreet hotel restaurant. It might have been a business meeting, but Tanya insisted they seemed closer than co-workers typically would be. Clarissa's heart clenched with doubt. She tried to brush it off, telling herself that trust was the backbone of any relationship. But from that day onward, she kept a wary eye on Vivian Brooks, the woman who threatened to turn her marriage upside down. As time went on, Clarissa's instincts about Vivian grew stronger, although she had no hard evidence of wrongdoing, at least not yet. Each day, Clarissa would watch Richard leave for the office earlier and return later, often citing unplanned meetings with new investors. She asked him casually, "How was your day? Were you with Vivian again?" Richard would shrug, his eyes darting away as though the question was an inconvenience. Yes, we had to finalize the terms on a big investment deal, he'd say, providing enough detail to sound truthful, but not enough to quell Clarissa's anxieties. Night after night, Clarissa's thoughts spiraled. She would stay awake, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, wondering if the rumors were real. Part of her wanted to trust Richard implicitly, remembering the gentle sincerity he had always shown her. Yet another part, battered by the slow drip of suspicion, kept replaying the possibility that Vivian had carved a place in Richard's life that went beyond business. The mere thought of betrayal cut Clarissa to the bone. The tension was palpable during a grand charity gala hosted by the Caulfields. Clarissa, radiant in a teal gown, maintained a polite smile while greeting affluent guests. In contrast, Richard appeared distracted, frequently checking his phone. At one point in the evening, she spotted him huddled with Vivian in a secluded corner, their heads bent close together. The sight made Clarissa's stomach churn. She watched as Vivian placed a hand lightly on Richard's arm. He didn't pull away. Later that night, Clarissa approached him in their penthouse, her voice trembling. "Are you sure there's nothing going on between you and Vivian? I'm hearing rumors." Richard's frustration flared. He accused Clarissa of letting petty gossip cloud her judgment. "She's a bright mind in our team. I'm mentoring her, nothing more," he insisted. But the tone in his voice felt defensive, guarded. The argument left both of them stewing in silence. A few weeks later, Clarissa discovered she was pregnant. The revelation should have been a joyous milestone that brought them closer. She imagined announcing the news over a candlelit dinner, seeing Richard's face light up at the prospect of fatherhood. But fear gnawed at her. How would he react? Would this baby bridge the growing rift between them, or would it become another complication in a marriage already under strain? In her quietest moments, Clarissa prayed that love would prevail over doubt. Little did she know that her pregnancy was about to become the weapon Vivian would wield against her. The day finally came for Clarissa's first ultrasound appointment. The excitement of hearing the baby's heartbeat mingled with her lingering worries about Richard's faithfulness. He had promised to accompany her, but an unexpected urgent meeting with Vivian forced him to cancel at the last minute. Clarissa's heart sank as she made the lonely drive to the obstetrician's office. Nevertheless, the moment she saw the small flicker of life on the monitor, her doubts were momentarily eclipsed by awe. She left the clinic with a digital copy of her ultrasound, eager to share it with Richard. That evening she sent him the image, attaching a heartfelt note. "This is our baby. I can't wait for you to hear the heartbeat. I love you." Hours passed with no response. When Richard finally returned home, he seemed distant, tired, he claimed. Clarissa noticed his eyes flick toward her phone, as though expecting more than just the ultrasound photo. A strange unease settled between them. A week later, Clarissa decided to schedule a private ultrasound session at a facility renowned for its advanced technology and more detailed imaging. She intended to surprise Richard with 3D images and a short video clip of the baby's movements. She made an appointment at the exclusive Madison Diagnostic Center, a place that frequently served high-profile clients who valued discretion. What she didn't know was that Vivian, ever resourceful, had caught wind of Clarissa's plan. Using her connection with one of the administrators at the center, an old college acquaintance, Vivian managed to gain unauthorized access to Clarissa's file. This was the moment where things turned insidious. With a few well-placed words and promises, she convinced the administrator to swap Clarissa's legitimate ultrasound with a doctored version. The altered ultrasound displayed discrepancies in fetal measurements, gestational age, and other details that would raise suspicions about paternity. A day later, Clarissa proudly handed Richard the 3D ultrasound images at home, unaware that they had been tampered with. He examined them, a frown forming across his brow. "Are you sure these are ours?" He questioned, sounding bewildered. Clarissa chuckled nervously. "Of course they are. I had them done just this morning." But as she spoke, Richard's expression darkened. The seed of doubt Vivian had planted was about to sprout into a full-blown nightmare, one that would unravel their marriage thread by delicate thread. Richard was no medical expert, but he possessed a keen eye for details, a skill honed through years of examining real estate contracts and business deals. Something in the ultrasound images didn't add up. The age markers showed a gestational period inconsistent with what Clarissa had initially told him. Subconsciously, he recalled Vivian's subtle, almost offhand remarks whenever Clarissa's pregnancy came up. "Are you sure the dates match, Richard?" Or, "It's surprising how far along she claims to be, given the timeline." Those remarks floated in Richard's mind as he studied the ultrasound, scanning the numbers and dates as though deciphering a financial ledger. He remembered the rumors about Clarissa's potential infidelity, rumors he had dismissed as idle chatter. Yet now he found himself questioning everything. Had she lied about how far along she was? Could there be a possibility this child wasn't his? When Clarissa tried to show him the video from the session, Richard's phone chimed, displaying a text from Vivian. "Heard about the new ultrasound. Let me know if you need a second opinion. I have some friends in the medical field." Clarissa glimpsed the message, her heart constricting with a pang of hurt. Why did Vivian even know about their private ultrasound appointment? She braced herself for an argument, but Richard didn't engage. Instead, he shoved his phone back into his pocket, tension rippling through his posture. Over the next few days, Richard's attitude toward Clarissa oscillated between cold distance and forced politeness. One morning, he caught her off guard by suggesting a paternity test. "What?" Clarissa asked, disbelief etched on her face. "I just want to be sure," Richard mumbled, avoiding eye contact. Her tears flowed freely. She pleaded with him to trust her, reminding him of the love they shared and the memories they'd built. But Richard, fueled by the doctored ultrasound and subtle manipulations by Vivian, stood firm on his request. Clarissa spent sleepless nights wondering how to restore her husband's trust. She called the diagnostic center, only to be told that their images were accurate and properly labeled. She felt trapped, as though the world she knew was collapsing around her. In her desperation, Clarissa reached out to Tanya Lewis at the marketing firm and confided her fears. Tanya listened, sympathetic yet worried. "We'll figure this out," she promised. But Clarissa couldn't shake the sensation that Vivian, hidden in the shadows, was holding all the strings in a puppet show set to destroy her marriage. Clarissa stared at the shimmering city lights through the penthouse windows, tears burning her eyes. Each bright point against the night sky felt like a mocking reminder of the promises she and Richard had once made. She remembered the time he had confessed his deepest fears of failing his family's legacy, of not being the son his father had always wanted him to be. She had cradled his head against her shoulder, whispering that he was already more than enough. Now, that same man was treating her like a stranger. Richard, holed up in his home office, rarely interacted with her. When they did speak, it was often about technicalities, medical appointments, finances, or household matters. Gone were the sweet nothings and spontaneous kisses that once defined their marriage. Instead, a chasm yawned between them, wide and cold. One evening, Clarissa mustered the courage to confront him about Vivian. She accused him of sharing intimate details of their private life with this woman who seemed intent on sowing discord. "You're imagining things," Richard snapped, his voice strained. "She's just trying to help me understand the medical discrepancies. She's resourceful, with a network of professionals." Clarissa was speechless. How had their once unbreakable bond eroded to a point where Richard placed more trust in an ambitious outsider than in his own wife? Desperate to clear her name, Clarissa sought a second opinion from another ultrasound clinic. She scheduled a discreet appointment at the Redwood Women's Center, where a compassionate technician named Samantha Reyes performed a thorough evaluation. Samantha assured Clarissa the baby's measurements matched her timeline exactly. Relieved, Clarissa left with a clean set of images, determined to show them to Richard and put an end to his suspicions once and for all. But the confrontation did not go as planned. Richard scoffed when she presented the new images, implying she might have bribed or manipulated the clinic staff. The bitterness in his voice was like acid on Clarissa's soul. She felt cornered, helpless, and exhausted. In a moment of desperation, she reached out to Richard's father, Arthur Caulfield, hoping the patriarch might offer guidance. He listened quietly before saying, "I don't know what's going on between you two, but remember that trust is fragile. If Richard has lost trust, it won't be easy to regain." Clarissa hung up the phone, tears streaming, as the weight of those words sank in. Trust once broken doesn't mend easily. And in this swirling storm of deceit, it seemed as though Clarissa stood alone. Within the plush confines of her luxurious apartment, Vivian Brooks reclined on a velvet sofa, swirling a glass of red wine in her hand. The city skyline glittered beyond floor-to-ceiling windows, but her thoughts were far from serene. She contemplated her next move in the carefully orchestrated game she was playing. The ultrasound manipulation had driven a wedge between Richard and Clarissa, but it wasn't quite enough to secure Vivian's position as the new lady of the Caulfield empire. Vivian's fascination with Richard wasn't born solely from love or even lust. It was rooted in ambition. She'd spent her childhood in a working-class neighborhood, watching her parents struggle to make ends meet. Hunger for power and financial security drove her to excel academically and cultivate relationships with influential people. Now, she had her sights set on Richard Caulfield, an heir to wealth and a wellspring of opportunity. She scrolled through her phone, scanning photos of the couple's recent events. They looked the perfect pair on the surface, but Vivian smirked, knowing what lay beneath. A single text from Richard earlier that day fueled her arrogance. "Thanks for the tip about the medical records. Confirms my suspicions." Vivian felt a surge of triumph. She typed back a carefully measured response. "I'm only looking out for you. Let me know if you need anything else." She pressed send, relishing the thought of Clarissa's despair. But Vivian knew she had to remain vigilant. Clarissa was no fool. If Clarissa managed to prove that the ultrasound was tampered with, Richard might see through Vivian's deceptions. So, Vivian reached out to her contact at Madison Diagnostic Center, ensuring all traces of tampering were wiped from digital logs. She manipulated emails, phone calls, and even bribed a lower-level employee to keep quiet. Every angle was covered, or so she believed. With each calculated step, Vivian ensnared Richard further. She dropped subtle hints that Clarissa was being secretive, nurturing his paranoia. When Richard questioned his relationship, she offered a shoulder to cry on, feigning concern while fanning the flames of his mistrust. Eventually, she hoped to replace Clarissa as not just the woman in Richard's arms, but also in his life, sharing in the power of the Caulfield name. Yet, in her pride, Vivian overlooked the one factor that could disrupt her plot entirely: the unborn child itself. No matter how many illusions one spins, the truth has a way of surfacing, and babies arrive bearing undeniable realities, ones that, when revealed, can upend even the most complex schemes. In the midst of her despair, Clarissa found an unexpected ally in Eloise Caulfield, Richard's mother. Eloise had initially harbored reservations about Clarissa, believing she lacked the high society pedigree befitting the Caulfield name. However, as she observed her son's troubled marriage, Eloise noticed that Clarissa's eyes shone with genuine love, tinged with the heartbreak of someone being unfairly maligned. Curious, she discreetly reached out to Clarissa one afternoon. They met at a quiet cafe along the harbour, away from the glitz of uptown Boston. Eloise listened attentively as Clarissa poured out her fears and confusions. The older woman's posture remained rigid, a remnant of her cultured upbringing, but her eyes softened as she realized that Clarissa had been the victim of vicious manipulation. Although Eloise tried to maintain a neutral stance, she couldn't help but bristle at the mention of Vivian's name, recalling her own uneasy impressions of the woman at previous Caulfield galas. Meanwhile, Tanya Lewis from the marketing firm continued to offer moral support. Armed with her resourcefulness and empathy, Tanya conducted a bit of sleuthing on Clarissa's behalf. She tracked down Samantha Reyes, the kind ultrasound technician at Redwood Women's Center, for any clues that might validate Clarissa's rightful ultrasound results. They found no anomalies. Redwood's records were pristine. The tampering, it seemed, was isolated to the suspicious images from Madison Diagnostic Center. That was all the evidence Tanya needed to suspect foul play. Tanya also leaned on her extensive professional network. Through a friend in the IT sector, she managed to trace digital footprints suggesting multiple logins and data alterations in Madison Diagnostic Center's system around the time Clarissa's ultrasound was uploaded. The unscrupulous employee who had assisted Vivian had tried to wipe the logs, but traces of suspicious activity remained. Bolstered by these discoveries, Clarissa felt a renewed sense of determination. The tears of helplessness were replaced by a burning resolve to prove her innocence and save her marriage. For Clarissa, it wasn't just about preserving her own dignity. She also wanted her child to grow up with both parents in a stable home. The next step would be risky, but with Tanya and Eloise in her corner, Clarissa was ready to confront the shadows. No longer was she a helpless pawn in Vivian's game. She was about to turn the tables, armed with courage, evidence, and the flickering hope that the truth would finally set her free. Richard sat in his corner office, high above the bustling city below. His schedule for the day lay untouched on his desk, as his mind wandered through a labyrinth of conflicting emotions. He remembered the early days of his relationship with Clarissa, her kind laughter, the warmth she brought to every room. On the other hand, he also recalled the swirl of suspicion that had taken root in his mind like a malignant weed. Each time he tried to push away the possibility that she might be lying, images of that suspicious ultrasound would flash back, paralyzing his hope. He absently scrolled through messages on his phone. Another text from Vivian popped up, brimming with concern. "Richard, are you okay? We can talk if you need to." He typed a quick thanks, uncertain if he wanted to continue confiding in her. Yes, Vivian was supportive, but something about how she thrived on his marital troubles felt off. It was as though each piece of drama fueled her eagerness to be near him. Suddenly, his mother, Eloise Caulfield, called. Richard answered, half expecting a reprimand for missing a family event. Instead, Eloise calmly informed him of a private dinner she wanted to host, just him, Clarissa, and a few close friends. The invitation was uncharacteristic of Eloise, who usually preferred opulent gatherings. She wouldn't reveal the specifics, but her tone was firm yet maternal. "Please come, son. It's important," she said, leaving him with no room for refusal. After ending the call, Richard stared out the window, his reflection merging with the cityscape. He couldn't escape the nagging feeling that the world wasn't quite as black and white as Vivian had made it seem. Could Clarissa, the woman he adored, truly be the manipulative villain in this story? And if she wasn't, what would that imply about his own role in tormenting her? That evening, he retreated to his condo gym, hoping to sweat away his turmoil. Yet, each time he lifted a weight or stared at himself in the mirrored walls, the questions pounded in his head. He had demanded a paternity test, belittled Clarissa's pleas, and trusted a woman, Vivian, who had glided into his life under suspicious circumstances. The once solid foundation of his confidence now quaked with uncertainty, leaving him teetering on the edge of regret. In the silence of that empty gym, Richard began to understand that if he'd wronged Clarissa, his marriage might already be standing on the brink of ruin. While Richard wrestled with his conscience, Vivian doubled down on her efforts to keep him tethered to her narrative. She knew Eloise Caulfield was hosting a private dinner, a perfect opportunity for Clarissa to present evidence that might absolve her. Vivian couldn't risk that, so she invited Richard to her lavish apartment under the guise of discussing a lucrative new deal. Walking into Vivian's apartment that night, Richard was met with soft jazz playing in the background, and the aroma of a gourmet meal filled the air. Candles flickered, casting an intimate glow around the room. Vivian greeted him with a glass of his favorite bourbon, her gaze holding a calculated mix of compassion and desire. "I thought you needed a place to relax," she murmured. They settled on her sofa, discussing potential investment opportunities. Eventually, though, the conversation shifted to Clarissa and the upcoming dinner. Vivian feigned concern, lightly touching Richard's arm. I just don't want you hurt again," she said, her voice quivering. "Clarissa might produce more of these fabricated ultrasounds. She could spin another story, trying to convince everyone you're the bad guy." Richard frowned, the swirl of doubt in his eyes clear. Sensing his uncertainty, Vivian leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've got documents from Madison Diagnostics that show no tampering ever occurred. If anyone tries to tell you otherwise, they're lying." She pulled out a folder with official-looking papers, carefully doctored by her inside contact. Richard scanned them, feeling a sickening mixture of relief and confusion. These documents contradicted everything Clarissa had been saying. While Richard skimmed through the pages, Vivian slithered her way into his personal space. She confessed how she had always admired him, how she cared too much about his happiness to see him trapped in a marriage built on deceit. Tired, stressed, and emotionally battered, Richard allowed himself to be drawn into her embrace. The lines between reality and manipulation blurred as Vivian pressed her advantage, sowing more seeds of doubt about Clarissa. Later, after Richard left, Vivian sipped her wine, satisfied with her performance. She believed she had tightened her hold on him, ensuring he'd walk into that private dinner with his mind poisoned against Clarissa. As far as Vivian was concerned, the dinner would end in Clarissa's final downfall. But destiny is rarely so predictable, and the powers of truth and love had yet to make their grand appearance in this tangled web. The evening of the private dinner arrived, cloaked in hushed tension. Eloise Caulfield had chosen a discreet upscale restaurant on the outskirts of Boston, far from the paparazzi and socialites who would have loved nothing more than to gossip about the Caulfield family drama. The guest list was small but significant. Richard and Clarissa, Tanya Lewis, Eloise herself, and a longtime family friend, Dr. Philip Green, a respected physician who had guided the Caulfields through various health matters for years. Clarissa stepped out of the car with resolve etched on her face. She wore a simple yet elegant black dress, her hair pulled back in a sleek chignon. If she felt nervous, she disguised it well behind composed grace. Richard arrived separately, looking tired and conflicted, still reeling from Vivian's latest manipulations. Inside the private dining room, the ambience was subdued, soft lighting, muted colors, and a single floral arrangement at the center of the table. Eloise greeted them with quiet warmth, her posture indicative of both concern and determination. She wasted no time in orchestrating the reason for this gathering, ushering them all into an adjacent lounge area to speak freely before dinner was served. Tanya cleared her throat, stepping forward with a small folder in her hands. Clarissa stood close by, clutching her own documents. Dr. Green observed quietly, sensing the tension in the air. "Richard," Tanya began, her voice steady but not accusatory, I have something important to show you." She proceeded to lay out the findings of her investigation, the suspicious logins at Madison Diagnostics, the testimonies from Redwood Women's Center, and even a statement from the bribed employee obtained anonymously but thoroughly vetted. Richard's eyes flickered with anxiety and confusion. He glanced at Clarissa, who then took a breath and presented her own set of ultrasound images and medical records from Redwood Women's Center. "This is our real baby," she said softly, her voice trembling with suppressed emotion. "And these are the legitimate test results that prove the child is yours." As Clarissa spoke, Eloise watched her son with keen eyes. She could see the gears shifting in his mind, pieces of a puzzle rearranging themselves. "Doctor," Green gently interjected, offering his expert opinion on the differences between genuine and tampered medical documents. Each new piece of evidence chipped away at the fortress of suspicion Vivian had built in Richard's thoughts. In that hushed lounge, the truth began to emerge like dawn after a long night. But the final unraveling the storm was still on the horizon, waiting for the right moment to strike. Eloise Caulfield's private dinner took place in an exclusive dining suite at the Bellevue Club, a refined, discreet venue tucked away from Boston's high society crowd. Unlike the lavish galas the Caulfields were known for, tonight's gathering was intentionally small and somber. The atmosphere in the plush, candlelit room was saturated with tension. At the center of it all stood Clarissa, her heart pounding as she prepared to present evidence of her innocence and save her marriage. Richard, seated at one end of a long mahogany table, looked drawn and exhausted, his gaze drifting anxiously between his mother, Eloise, and Clarissa. Across from them sat Tanya Lewis, Clarissa's closest confidant. Tanya nervously shuffled a folder of documents, her lips pressed tight in concentration. To her right was Dr. Philip Green, a family friend of the Caulfields and a respected physician, who had agreed to examine the suspicious medical records and vouch for Clarissa's legitimate ultrasound results. The low buzz of muted conversation from other private rooms drifted in and out of hearing, making the tension in this chamber all the more palpable. Everyone understood that tonight the web of secrets and lies that had so tightly entangled Clarissa and Richard would be either fully unraveled or forever left in limbo. Eloise broke the silence. "Before we dine, I want you all to look at the documentation Clarissa has gathered," she said, her voice resolute yet laced with concern. Her regal posture and polished grey hair lent her an air of quiet authority. She handed Richard a set of printed ultrasound images from Redwood Women's Center, accompanied by medical records certified by Dr. Green. Richard's eyes flickered to Clarissa's for the briefest moment before focusing on the paperwork. Dr. Green cleared his throat, stepping in to explain. "These are Clarissa's genuine ultrasound images, confirmed by Redwood's digital watermark and cross-referenced with her consistent medical history." In contrast, he tapped a separate set of papers. The ones from Madison Diagnostic Center show significant discrepancies in metadata and date logs. This strongly suggests they were tampered with. A hush fell over the room as Richard studied the documents, his brow creased in concentration. Tanya interjected softly, "I've done my own investigation too. I contacted an IT specialist who traced unauthorized logins to Clarissa's files at Madison Diagnostics. It appears someone accessed them multiple times and made alterations." Her voice trembled slightly, for even though she was determined, she understood that the final decision rested with Richard. Eloise and Clarissa watched him anxiously. Clarissa's gaze lingered on her husband, recalling happier days, late-night dinners, early morning coffees, and the look of tender affection that had once been his hallmark. Now, his face betrayed a turbulent mix of guilt, confusion, and flickers of hope. He opened his mouth to speak, but before any words could escape, the double doors to the suite crashed open. All heads snapped in the direction of the sudden commotion. There stood Vivian Brooks, clad in a sleek crimson gown, her features sharp and determined. She walked in with the confidence of someone who believed herself untouchable. The hush in the room intensified as she locked eyes first with Richard, then with Eloise, and finally let her gaze settle on Clarissa in a venomous stare. "I heard about this little gathering," she announced, her voice dripping with condescension. "I couldn't just stand by while more lies are spread about me." Eloise set her jaw in displeasure. "Vivian," she said curtly, "this is a private dinner. You weren't invited." A security guard stationed just outside stepped closer, uncertain whether he should intervene. Vivian waved him off with a dismissive gesture, turning instead to face Richard, who looked utterly taken aback by her sudden appearance. "Aren't you going to stand up for me?" Vivian demanded, her voice rising an octave. She cast a suspicious glare at the folders spread across the table. "Let me guess, they're claiming I doctored some ultrasound? How convenient." She let out a brittle laugh, filled with anger and desperation. "Richard, you know Clarissa's story has been full of inconsistencies from the start." Clarissa, despite the anxiety twisting in her gut, stepped forward with surprising calm. "Vivian, we have proof, irrefutable proof, from Redwood Women's Center and verified digital logs showing alterations made to the Madison Diagnostics files. Why else would the metadata indicate multiple edits at odd hours, using credentials linked to your network?" Vivian's eyes flashed. She spun toward Tanya, spotting the neatly organized folder in her hands. Seizing her chance, she lunged and grabbed the papers. With a single violent motion, she began tearing them, scattering fragments onto the polished floor. Tanya let out a cry of alarm, and Dr. Green moved to salvage any remaining sheets. The security guard rushed in, but Vivian shook him off, her fury now unmasked. "This is all a setup!" she shrieked, brandishing the torn scraps. "You're all in on it, desperate to protect this fraud of a wife." Yet no matter how dramatically she tried to destroy the documents, the damage was already done to her own ruse. Dr. Green produced a USB drive from his inner jacket pocket and held it up. "The original digital files are intact, Miss Brooks. The paper copies you just tore were only backups. Your actions speak volumes about your motives." A profound silence followed. Richard stared at Vivian, the woman he had so recently trusted. The dam holding back his doubts began to crack. Every shred of evidence, every contradiction now aligned against Vivian's story. He swallowed hard, rose from his seat, and approached her. His voice was low, tinged with hurt more than anger. "Vivian, what did you do?" The question lingered in the charged air, his tone revealing heartbreak that threatened to eclipse even his anger. Vivian's stance faltered. Her eyes darted from Richard to the damning USB drive, then to Eloise's stern glare, and finally to Clarissa's resolute posture. For an instant, she looked ready to lash out again, but all her manipulations had lost their power in the face of undeniable facts. Her composure shattered, revealing the desperation underneath. As the security guard finally escorted Vivian out, she could be heard muttering curses under her breath, her fury aimed at everyone in the room. In that pivotal moment, the entire conspiracy against Clarissa lay bare, leaving Richard grappling with the enormity of his mistake. And so, with Vivian's final desperate tantrum echoing in the corridor, the darkest chapter of betrayal reached its breaking point. At last, Clarissa had the opening she needed to reclaim her truth and, perhaps, begin to mend the fragile trust that once formed the cornerstone of her marriage. Chaos erupted the moment Vivian realized her carefully laid plan was crumbling. She launched into a tirade, accusing everyone present of conspiring against her. Her eyes blazed with fury as she tried to spin new lies, claiming Dr. Green had been paid off by the Caulfield family, that Tanya was forging documents to push Clarissa's agenda, and that Clarissa herself was an expert manipulator skilled in tricking unsuspecting men. None of it, however, was sticking anymore. Richard reeled, grappling with the immense guilt of having doubted his wife so profoundly. He remembered the nights he had pushed Clarissa away, the harsh words he had flung at her. A wave of remorse threatened to pull him under. But Clarissa, despite her heartbreak, stepped forward with compassion in her eyes. She reached for his hand, a silent gesture that said forgiveness might still be possible if he found the courage to accept the truth. Eloise Caulfield, her composure regal and unyielding, signaled to a security guard stationed just beyond the dining room. "I believe Miss Brooks has overstayed her welcome," Eloise said curtly. The guard approached, but before he could lay a hand on her, Vivian snatched up the folder containing the incriminating documents, ripping pages out in a wild attempt to destroy them. Her face was contorted in an unmasked fury that left no doubt about her motivations. Tanya let out a startled cry as she watched her hard-earned evidence torn. Thankfully, Dr. Green, with surprising swiftness, retrieved digital backups from a USB drive in his pocket. Vivian's desperate act had come too late. Technology had saved the day. Realizing her last chance at controlling the narrative was gone, Vivian let out a guttural scream, a sound filled with rage and bitter defeat. The guard firmly escorted her out. After the door slammed shut behind her, a hush fell over the room. Tears glistened in Clarissa's eyes. She stood there, holding Richard's hand, aware of how fragile this moment was. He pulled her close, burying his face in her shoulder. "I'm so sorry," he whispered brokenly. She stroked his hair, unable to speak through the lump in her throat. Dinner, at that point, was inconsequential. The main course was overshadowed by the emotional reconciliation unfolding. Richard's remorse, Clarissa's relief, and Eloise's quiet gratitude saturated the air. Yet, beneath the surface, another storm brewed. Clarissa was due to give birth within weeks, and the weight of this entire ordeal had taken a toll on her health. Delivery day was looming on the horizon, and with it a final test that would either solidify their newfound unity or shatter it irrevocably. A sharp, insistent pain coursed through Clarissa's abdomen in the pre-dawn hours. She woke with a startled gasp, reaching out for Richard. The tension of recent weeks had overshadowed the typical excitement of pregnancy, and Clarissa hadn't prepared herself mentally for the onset of labor. But nature waited for no one. The baby was coming, and fast. Richard sprang into action. He grabbed the hospital bag that Clarissa had meticulously packed months ago. There was an urgency, a determination in his movements, as though he wanted to atone for every moment he had failed her. He helped Clarissa into the car, whispering reassurances, pressing gentle kisses on her forehead between contractions. At the hospital, Dr. Green, who had been looped in after the fiasco at the private dinner, was waiting. He had arranged for a trusted obstetrician, Dr. Naomi Blair, to oversee the delivery. Nurses rushed Clarissa into a delivery suite. Monitors beeped. The sterile smell of disinfectant permeated the air, and adrenaline spiked in Richard's veins. The labor was intense. Clarissa labored through waves of contractions, tears streaming down her face from both pain and pent-up emotion. Richard clutched her hand, offering words of encouragement. "I'm here," he repeated, like a mantra of devotion. Hours stretched, blurring into an emotional haze. Finally, after an exhausting push, the baby's cries filled the room, a high-pitched wail that ushered in hope and renewal. Dr. Blair announced, "It's a boy," and the tension broke, replaced by a flood of overwhelming relief. Nurses cleaned and swaddled the tiny infant before placing him gently in Clarissa's arms. Richard stood by her side, tears slipping down his cheeks. He gazed at his son, so small, so perfect, and felt a love so profound it nearly swallowed him whole. In that moment, every lie, Every manipulated ultrasound image, every toxic whisper from Vivian dissipated like fog under the morning sun. His guilt still weighed on him, but the sight of the baby, alive and undeniably his, brought a peace he hadn't felt in months. As Clarissa cradled their newborn, Richard leaned in, resting a gentle hand on the baby's head. "Forgive me," he murmured to both mother and child. Clarissa looked up, her eyes filled with understanding and a tenderness that had survived every trial. She nodded, the newborn stirring in her arms, oblivious to the storm he had just transcended. Outside, dawn light peeked through the window, signaling not just a new day, but a chance for a new beginning. Recovery in the maternity ward offered Richard and Clarissa precious hours to reflect on the trials that had nearly torn them apart. The baby, whom they named James Arthur Caulfield, in honor of Clarissa's father, James, and Richard's father, Arthur, rested in a bassinet by Clarissa's bed, occasionally letting out soft sighs or whimpers. Friends and family trickled in, bringing flowers, teddy bears, and congratulations. Eloise arrived with tears in her eyes, overjoyed to hold her newborn grandson. She kissed Clarissa's forehead and patted Richard's shoulder. "Your father sends his love," she said softly. "He'll be here once he wraps up business on the West Coast." In those quiet, early days of parenthood, the weight of what had transpired truly sank in for Richard. He couldn't ignore the lingering sense of shame over how easily he had fallen prey to Vivian's manipulations. Late at night, when the ward was silent except for the hum of machines and the gentle breathing of mother and child, he sat alone in a chair by Clarissa's bed, grappling with remorse. Even so, Clarissa's forgiveness offered a balm that soothed his guilty conscience. They spoke in hushed tones about the future, pledging to rebuild their bonds stronger and more transparent than ever before. Meanwhile, Vivian had vanished from their lives, or so it seemed. Whispers circulated in Richard's company about her abrupt resignation. Some claimed she planned to leave Boston, while others speculated she might re-emerge elsewhere, aiming to climb another corporate ladder. Regardless, the Caulfields made it clear that she was no longer welcome in their circle. Protective measures were put in place to ensure she couldn't infiltrate any of their business affairs again. As Clarissa and Richard prepared to leave the hospital, they paused in the corridor, gazing down at baby James, nestled securely in his car seat. In that tiny face, they saw not just a new life, but a testament to the resilience of love. They had stumbled, nearly lost each other, but fate or divine grace had offered them a second chance. With renewed commitment, they walked forward, out the hospital doors and into the crisp afternoon air, determined to meet whatever challenges life might throw their way, together. And so concludes the tumultuous journey of Clarissa and Richard Caulfield, a testament to how easily trust can be broken, yet also how profoundly it can be repaired when love prevails. From the moment Clarissa discovered she was pregnant to the day she held her precious child in her arms, she faced unthinkable betrayal and heartbreak. Yet, with faith, determination, and the help of loyal allies, the truth finally shattered every vicious lie. If you found yourself gripped by the twists and turns of this story, if you felt Clarissa's heartbreak, Richard's guilt, and the relief of their ultimate reunion, then we invite you to be part of our journey. Like this video, share it with friends who love a gripping drama, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another enthralling tale of love and resilience. Thank you for watching, and we hope you join us again soon.